Hi friends, today we are going to cover some very important question of microservices asked in multiple different interviews. So let's start. So first question is, what is microservices? So microservices are a way of designing software applications as a collection of small independent services that work together to perform certain tasks. Each services focuses on a specific function and communicates with other through well-defined interfaces. Second question is, what is the difference between microservices and monolithic architecture? So, as you know, in a monolithic architecture, an application is built as a single large piece of software, while in microservices, break this into smaller parts where each part or service can be developed, deployed, and scaled independently. Then, why are microservices beneficial? So, microservices offer improved scalability, easier maintenance, and flexibility in technology choices. They also enable faster development and deployment of individual services without affecting the whole application. Then, what are some challenges of microservices? So, microservices can introduce complexities in terms of communication between services, managing data consistency, and ensuring fault tolerance. Coordinating updates across services can also be challenging. So, it makes your application it introduces some challenges in your application. How do microservices communicate with each other? So we know, like, microservices typically communicates using well-defined APIs, which are like rules for how can they talk to each other. So normally common communication methods include HTTP, REST-based API, messaging queues, or gRPC. And what is the role of containers in microservices? So we know, like, containers like Docker, it helps packages each microservice and its dependencies into a consistent environment. Like, this ensures that the service runs consistently across different machines and can be easily deployed. Then how do microservices support continuous deployment? So microservices can be updated and deployed independently. This allows developers to release new features or fixes for specific services without needing to really deploy the entire application. So like in microservices, you have multiple different small applications, so you can deploy it independently, right? What is service discovery in microservices? So service discovery is a way of microservices to find and connect to each other in a dynamic environment. So it helps basically manage the changing locations and instances of services, because in a multi-instance environment, you cannot know the exact the IP and port of each instances. So it dynamically connects to those instances. How do microservices enhance fault tolerance? So microservice can be designed to isolate failures. If one service fails, it doesn't necessarily bring down entire application. Additionally, using load balancer and redundancy can improve fault tolerance. So for that purpose, like, it uses load balancer and multiple instances. Are microservices suitable for all projects? So here is the catch. So microservices are basically beneficial for complex projects that need scalability, flexibility, and rapid development. While for smaller projects, a monolithic approach might be more straightforward in a starting point. As your scale grows up, then later you can think about the microservice-based approach. What is the role of API gateway in microservices architecture? So an API gateway acts as a single entry point for clients to interact with various microservices. It can handle tasks like authentication, load balancing, and routing requests to the appropriate service. How can data consistency be maintained in microservices? So maintaining data consistency across microservices can be achieved through techniques like the Saga pattern. So like Saga is basically a sequence of local transaction, or by using eventual consistency in a distributed environment where data inconsistencies are resolved over time. What is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication in microservices? So synchronous communication happens when one service waits for a response from another before proceeding. So earlier you used to have like REST template to communicate between two different microservices over HTTP. So, and in asynchronous communication, allows services to send messages without waiting for immediate responses or enhancing responsiveness. For this purpose, normally we use messaging queue or Kafka. How do microservices handle database management? So microservices can have their own databases or shared databases. It has both approach. So each approach has trade-offs. So separate databases can ensure service independence, but sharing database can simply hide some tasks like complex queries. Like when you have queries like joins a lot in your application. In that case, like if you have uh, shared database, so that can help you, right? Can microservices be used with DevOps practices? Yes, microservices align well with DevOps. DevOps emphasizes collaboration between development, IT operations, and microservices independent deployment fits this approach by allowing continuous integration and deployment. What is the 12-factor app methodology in microservices? So basically, the 12-factor app methodology provides the best practices for building cloud-native applications, including microservices. It covers areas like configuration, dependencies, and scaling that contribute to scalable and maintainable apps. So how do you ensure security in microservices architecture? So security in microservices involves a strategy like using API gateways for authentication and encryption, implementing proper access controls, regularly updating dependencies, and employing security testing. You can also have some more thing like you can have penetration testing. You can have like you can implement the proper token-based mechanism. But these are the standard practices. Can microservices architecture lead to overcomplication? Yes, of course. If not planned properly, microservices can lead to overcomplication. Breaking an application into too many services can increase communication overhead and complexity. So careful design and monitoring are essential. What is the relationship between microservices and serverless architecture? So serverless architecture abstracts away the infrastructure management, allowing developers to focus solely on code. So microservices can be implemented using serverless functions provided by different cloud vendors, and combining the benefits of both approaches. Okay. How do you monitor and troubleshoot microservices? So monitoring tools help track service health, response times, and resource utilization. Troubleshooting involves analyzing logs, matrices, and tracing requests across services to identify and resolve issues. So for these purposes, like there are many tools in the market for different things, like for monitoring and for creating matrices, there are multiple tools. Even for the distributed tracing and log, you have different tools. You can use as per that your requirement, which tools you want to use. Are microservices suitable for legacy system integration? So integrating microservices with legacy system can be challenging due to indifferences in architecture. However, using APIs and creating adapters can facilitate a gradual transition while maintaining functionality. So for that purpose, you have also in microservices various design pattern that support like how you can convert your existing monolithic application into the microservice based application in a step-by-step order. So for that, something you can use the Strangler pattern. So I will cover those things in the further set of questions. What is the role of caching in microservices architecture? So caching can enhance performance by storing frequently accessed data in memory. It is useful for reducing the load on the databases and improving response time for certain operations. Again, for the caching, you can use different distributed cache or centralized cache as per your project requirement. And for that also we have multiple different options like Redis, Hegel cache, and there are other options too in the market so you can explore that. How do microservices impact testing strategy? So microservices require testing at both the individual service level and the integrated system level. Unit tests, integration test, end-to-end test, these are crucial to proper functioning. Other than that, you have like component testing, you have penetration testing, and there are multiple other type of testing. So that was it. Thank you guys. If you like it, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Thanks a lot.